201.
For purposes, yeah.
All right, Chief. Doing all right. All right, good. Good.
All right, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Just want to call the September 19th meeting of the Community Wellness Committee to order. So, Councilmember Murphy is not here, Councilmember Falco, and I'm here. You have any go to the minutes from August 1st?
I did, all looked good to me. No changes here.
Okay, sounds good. Well, we're going to approve the minutes, we're ready to vote on it, so we can certainly approve them. Thank you, appreciate it. All right, so I figured, it seems like it's a long way off here because what was it, August 16th that we had the Community Wellness Summit, so we're almost a month out.
I know, it feels like it was so long ago.
It really does. But I figured tonight we really needed to have some time to kind of debrief, to try to just think about the takeaways and what those next steps are. We certainly discussed a lot of things at the summit, and near the end you're trying to kind of push it to a direction. It just didn't seem like there was a lot of consensus around kind of how to move that forward, and I think folks were kind of looking for us to continue moving things forward, and it seemed like everyone really had a real impetus to try to develop any kind of subgroups out of it. And as the chief kind of mentioned to me earlier, there's certainly, and we heard there's a lot of other groups that are already coalescing around these things, so I think there's just a lot of redundancy, and perhaps people just didn't want to get into that. So let me just open it up to all of you who were there. Thoughts about it, kind of debrief, what went well, what could we change in the future, and then we can start getting into those takeaways and next steps and delivery to that. But what were some of your main thoughts about the overall summit?
I felt it was very helpful, at least for me, to have all of these people in a room to kind of see what kind of services are available and where, and it became pretty evident where people's focus and attention is. Definitely there was an emphasis on housing, and what I've been thinking about is, and I haven't really heard anything, is there anything happening with that warming station?
So, as far as I can tell, it's still in the works. They have at least looked at a couple of potential locations, but haven't settled on anything, and I don't know, I mean, the clock is running out.
Right.
So,
I'll be able to speak to that a little bit.
Okay.
So Bob Terrell owns the building that had the roof collapse, and he's Patricia Leonard, before she went out she was on vacation for a couple of seconds, she's back now, was getting estimates for getting that roof repaired, and Bob, he's in Montana or Wyoming, right? Montana. And trout fishing, I'm sure. And he's an awfully good guy, and he was inclined to consider it was a reasonable dollar amount to try to get that roof repaired. In the meantime, First Presbyterian Church stepped up and said, well, if you need a place, and they do, we're an option. Of course, the issue winds up being the laundry, the washer and dryer, the larger space where you've got any number of beds in one usable area, and then a place that is kind of sequestered for office or issues. So that's where they're at right now. And I have a meeting with Patricia Wednesday, and hopefully she'll have. And Chrissy was out. Mm-hmm. Their vacations were kind of like that. But she'll have had an opportunity to connect with Chrissy. Hopefully we'll have some sort of resolution. But it looks like one thing or another will, come to pass. So I think we're going to be okay.
Okay, and that's great.
Yeah.
So Mayor, just to kind of key on that, so you feel one way or another that there is a solution at hand, whether
To the warming station
warming
piece,
station.
yeah, I was surprised if that doesn't, resolve itself. It's, as I said, it appears we've got a couple of good options.
Okay. Were there any other options beyond that were?
Yeah, I mean, there's been There were conversations. There's one with still the owner of the Oneonta Abstract building, which they're interested in actually purchasing, which is over on Chestnut Street next to Walgreens. You know, if you've ever tried to close on a house, you know, so it's not a, you know, it may not be something that they can make happen, you know, immediately, but that may be their long-term plan. They're kind of, I think, more interested in that space than not.
Who is the they?
They is Catholic Charities, generally speaking, and you know, this kind of little ad hoc consortium.
During the summit, somebody kind of mentioned the Armory as a potential site. Was that ever?
Yeah, we talked about it internally here. It's a tough site for any number of reasons, and not the least of which is, you know, they have the money, Catholic Charities does, and this organization does, to be able to throw up a wall or to do this and do that. But we also have the Oneonta Teen Center there. You know, there's some potential for a connection that maybe we don't want to have. And so, and then it's also a space that, you know, there may be other utilization for that we, you know, don't want to forego for the fact that we've, you know, gone down that road. But it is, you know, it's obviously an option of last resort.
Right. Yeah, I'm not pushing for that, just didn't know if
Yeah,
it's something
yeah.
that people had discussed or whatever. Okay. Well, it's good to hear, at least it sounds like we'll have a solution for winter time.
Yeah, for the warming station piece, there, you know, we have, you know, arguably bigger issues than that around, you know, homeless, but at least for that piece, yes. And if I can jump in anyway, as long as this motivating. My takeaway from the housing summit, aside from the fact that I loved it, you know, I loved the fact of all those folks being put together in a room and some of those silos being broken down a bit, and then the realization on some people's parts of the redundancy of some of their efforts, and then, you know, most specifically the thing that you determined you're going to focus on, which is the identifying the gaps in coverage. And I think we did identify some gaps in coverage, but what I saw was the same thing that you alluded to, which is every conversation. You had 3 different conversations that you wanted to have, I think 3 or 4 different conversations you wanted to have, but each one of them wound up going back to, you know, our homeless concern and the need for housing for the homeless, at the very least the need for housing, and then beyond that programmatic kind of stuff. And I'm here to tell you that it's, Chief, I'm sure you'll, you know, bear me out on this. It's an issue of real concern in, you know, in the city and most specifically in downtown. And it's really not getting better. I don't know that there isn't a conversation that has to happen, you know, at the county level, you know, about, you know, because, you know, if you've got a panhandler, and somebody mentioned this to me the other day, and I just can't let go of it. If you have a panhandler, somebody who's begging money or, you know, in some fashion, you know, being disruptive to the normal flow of traffic in front of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, how long do you think they stay there? Mm-hmm. You know, why, you know, is that okay for them, but not okay for us, you know, to have, you know, an accommodating and welcoming, you know, downtown? You know, not to marginalize, obviously, to put together this committee specifically to address this very serious issue. But I feel like, and I'm not the only one who feels this way, that there are, you know, 2 sets of expectations depending on where you are in the county. Mm-hmm. And in cities, the expectation is that we have services and we have transportation, but we don't have the housing for them, and we have, you know, the hotels and motels essentially performing that function without supervision, you know, and it's untenable, and it's not something we can really allow to continue. So, so I was happy for that first step, you know, and I think that there were a couple people who really stepped up and said that we want to do some sort of a task force around, I continue to go to the chief's, community solutions panel as, as the prototype. We really need to tackle this with the players that have the expertise and the wherewithal in certain cases. It's more than, you two, you three, and Luke Murphy can handle by themselves. We need to bring other people into this.
I think a really large part of that, Mayor, is, and this has come up in repeated conversations, is the inflated housing markets here on the Alto. And somebody had mentioned a tiny houses project, and I think there's a lot of like the not in my backyard philosophy. If we look at like the RSS housing project that was considered, the other thing is how much more non-taxable property, and this is something that's been brought up on multiple occasions, can the city sustainably afford to give away to try to sustain a population of people that is ever growing? Especially, and this is not coming from me, but coming from other people, when we have people at the warming shelter that come from Pennsylvania because they don't have a warming station. If we're attracting people here because we don't have an infrastructure that can sustain X number of people and we're already at our limit, how do we manage the expectations of people when it comes to being able to provide affordable housing when, even somebody that's a gainfully employed person is having a difficulty buying a home within the city limits because of the expenses? And I think the rental markets in a lot of ways have become so profitable, especially for people parsing out rooms, that they've inflated artificially the investments that people are willing to make for monetary gain. And I think that's where codes comes in, is, really have to support code enforcement in their operations to be able to make sure that we're staying on track when it comes to keeping rental properties accountable and rental owners accountable to the people that live in those neighborhoods. And I think we've really got quite a lot of rental properties, and I think at one point it was more than 60% in certain neighborhoods, which is concerning.
Mm-hmm. It is. Certainly it's one of the charges of the housing task force work group, specifically that short-term, quote-unquote, housing issue, but more, more generally, the notion of, let's say in a perfect world, we were able to change the dynamic of how Motel 88 and Townhouse Motor Inn and the other, I can't think of the name, over on South Side, are utilized essentially by folks that are putting up folks that otherwise have no place else to be. So were we to change that model, which would, I think, there'd be a lot of support for, certainly because we're seeing, those folks out on the street. Well, changing the model requires, pushing people out of aid requires some sort of a beat. There needs to be something figured out. Honestly, I don't have the answer. And my hope is that maybe we can pull together some of those folks that have self-identified as potentially, the folks will help us get to that solution. But we need to change the overall dynamic of, where we don't have any place to put people, but we have these 3 motels that are welcome, that will welcome these folks, and in the meantime, they're unsupervised, generally speaking. They can use it as a safe refuge for, their, one of the things, again, talking about is addictions, and we give them a safe place to, further, kind of their poor choices. So, clearing that out in some fashion requires some, some plan. And I don't know what that plan is.
Right. I mean, the other thing too, in those spaces, I guarantee there are more people living in those spaces than should be.
Well, it goes to a compliance issue, and you're supposed to sign a contract with DSS But I don't know that the DSS fraud investigators have the capacity to be able to do the visits that are necessary to be able to maintain that compliance. So we've tried to open a pipeline from the police department to be able to notify them on each instance when we're dealing with somebody that's believed to be in some way connected to social services. They can't tell us, but we can tell them every time that we've had an engagement with someone, this is who we've spoken to and these were the circumstances behind it. That kind of opens a door to, well, if that is a person, they can look that up on their own. Does that violate the contract? In one instance, I dealt with someone that had been lodged by, or at least he told me he was lodged by Department of Social Services and hadn't been in his room in 4 days. We said, if I'm gone 2 days, they don't pay for it anymore. Well, the only way that they know not to pay for it is if somebody tells them. So we've got a room that's unoccupied that DSS is paying for 4 days, probably even more, until they finally say, well, this guy's not at the room anymore, we have to stop the room. So, how much is being lost to those people not complying with the rules? And a lot of people choose to be homeless as opposed to deal with a 9:30 curfew.
Mm-hmm.
So, because they don't want to be pigeonholed into that curfew, they don't go back, but the rooms are still being paid for because there's no compliance.
So, to me, the very fact that you call the summit the housing summit indicates to me that there's been a choice for this committee to have that be the problem we want to solve. What I experienced at that meeting was it was almost a hijacking into just talking about the homeless. I was sitting next to people who could have spoken to food security for families. I was sitting next to people with a great deal of expertise in mental health, which is also a huge problem. Mm-hmm. And I think those are like some root causes of homelessness. And I feel like we went around and around and we talk about homelessness. And I just want to be clear, if that is the charge of the wellness committee, then it is. But I feel that there are other things that make a community healthy and well and safe. And there are many people working on the homeless problem, on the affordable housing problem, on the women's shelter issue. And I think as a committee, we should just be really clear, is this our charge? Is this our charge to take the lead, to be involved, to facilitate? And have we given up the idea of really looking at other issues, problems, root causes?
I think you make a really good point with food insecurity, because that's a big issue. That was brought up at the community stakeholders meeting through Bassett. And I think one of the things that we kind of agreed on there is that there's a gap between production and distribution. And a lot of that is volunteerism. And we were looking at populations that are depleting, and the majority of the respondents to surveys that were conducted through Bassett are women over the age of 65, which create a large portion of the demographics of the county. How many people do we have that are going to be able to volunteer their time? And most of the people we're talking about are seniors to begin with, are in remote, potentially, areas, and many of themselves being a great deal of need for services. So, again, I think what we're seeing is kind of the result of many years of people leaving, especially young people, from the community, and we've talked about this before, and that vibrance of volunteerism, just like we see with the volunteer fire departments. I mean, we're just not seeing people volunteer for service like we used to. Even getting people, I was brought up by one of the folks there for youth volunteers. Super hard to get people to volunteer to do stuff on their own time when they themselves are financially struggling. Mm-hmm. But it's a really excellent point when you start talking about food insecurity, because I think that's a big issue for homelessness and mental health.
If I could just jump in real quick, and then I'll quiet here. So I did not intentionally conflate the Housing Commission. I mentioned the work group in the Housing Commission. that is, specifically addressing some of these very same issues, and that's what I was referencing. The reality of it is that the charge for this group has not changed, and I wouldn't expect that it would change, and that is, the homelessness and the addiction issues and the mental health issues and the food insecurity issues. Those are the quartet of issues that I tasked the group with. My sense of it, though, just relative to the summit, was that everybody's conversation seemed to, didn't matter, what thing we want to talk about, generally speaking as a topic, they continue to drive toward the homelessness issue, as a group. And that said, that there's clearly energy around that, and there's clearly need. It doesn't change the fact of these other three components beyond the homelessness as being, potentially equal in concern and charge. But there is energy around the homelessness piece right now, and I feel like, referencing, you asked, about the take on the wellness summit. That's my take, is that there is that energy. The people have identified that there are things that they'd like to see done. They're inclined to want to do some sort of a little task force within that context. But by no means should we be looking at these other charges as being less than a priority. I'm done.
Yeah, I agree, and, if anything, personally, I don't know that I think that housing is the issue, or, is the answer necessarily. I think that, if you look at the community of Oneonta, we want to attract more young people here, we need to focus on raising our police salaries, and we need to attract more people to come and keep our community vibrant and safe. Before we can start, if we build a complex, then that's going to attract more people to come here. And I just don't know that our community can sustain something like that. It has to be, if there's gonna be some kind of housing that comes in, it has to be alongside housing for working people and, stimulating our economy and that kind of thing. I don't know, I feel like our hospitals are pretty maxed, I don't know that, we need housing for the people that are here, but I worry that population of Oneonta will increase while other parts will not, if I can be frank about that.
I guess I feel like we're kind of looking for the silver bullet answers to kind of solve these problems, and I think that they're complex, and I don't know that we have the answers immediately in our hands. And housing, while important, doesn't address everything. I think you can make that point clear. I'm thinking it might be worth our time to kind of focus on our role, not to answer all these questions and solve all these questions, but the original role that we focus on was to facilitate conversations, and to try to look for where we could play a role that was not being served. For example, one of the things that I took away from it was that it seemed like there was a pretty strong interest in having an inventory of the organizations and what their capacity was. And to me, that might be something that is something we can do that's within our, certainly I recognize a lot of time invested in that. But if that's something that the organizations feel is of great value to them, that they know who to reference and they know where to turn to be able to recommend services, or they have to contact people there. If that's the role we can play, it's not really facilitation, but facilitation of information that can be easily communicated and given to people. To me, I think that's something we can focus on as a takeaway. And that kind of gets us back into looking at all the organizations and not just focusing on the homeless, but as what are the different pieces? Because they're obviously all overlap, right? We recognize that. Chief, you made me aware of that early on in this is that what I call the trifecta of issues, homelessness, mental health, and substance abuse. And so, and then certainly food security can be part of that, although there's a lot of other people that don't fall there that are impacted by food security, of course. So I think by focusing on the inventory capacity of the organizations, we might be able to kind of spread out and hit all of these particular areas and help kind of play that role. My other takeaway was that it seemed as though, and I really want to ask you all your thoughts about this. I heard half the folks saying, yes, we would like to have more conversations on a regular basis like this. I heard the other half of the folks saying, we're already meeting and having these conversations. So I kind of left going, what's the way forward there? I don't really know unless it's to try to work alongside some of the existing organizations that are meeting and try to make sure that conversation is, maybe that there's others at the seat. I don't know. I really walked away that one very confused. So I'll leave it out there. Thoughts about that? Was that my takeaway? Was that consistent with what your takeaway was in terms of the two groups?
Yeah.
We don't have any more time or capacity to meet. We would like to meet and have more facilitation of meetings.
I definitely heard people being appreciative of bringing them together and maybe wanting to explore some partnerships they hadn't before. So then, yeah, I love your idea about taking that inventory. Maybe we can start to see patterns where we can help people work together. Or the county, the county has been summer last week, and they're working with Bassett because of their grant out at the county building, right, Chris? I couldn't remember what, Melissa from SUNY Garden said that there was a lot of talk about mental health too, and mental needs. But we should work, I think, with them a little bit in all of these areas.
I think I might have thrown you under the bus for something, and I can't remember what it was. I think I told them to call you as a resource and that you were a valuable resource for the city, but I can't remember exactly what the context was. So.
That's my job.
I know. And I knew that I know you have broad shoulders, and you'll take that on, but yeah, I certainly did mention your name at one point. I just can't remember the context of what it was. Yeah. I've been dealing with these populations for a long time, and there's a lot of commonalities, and I think when you start getting practitioners into a room, it's pretty easy to agree upon, early childhood challenges as being a real precipitator of events later on in life, and the determinant of success, and being able to break the cycle of generational behavior really starts with kids. And I think a lot of people are really doing a lot of good work, especially, I think there's talk about an initiative to get a social worker in every school in the state. I know Oneonta's done a very good job of being able to provide that social worker presence to the students. And I think all of us agree that unaddressed childhood trauma, whether it's through a parent suffering from addiction or domestic violence issues, justice involvement, fragmented home, all contribute to this generational cycle.
So, that being said, I wonder if maybe the city could step in somehow with some kind of, I know you talked about childcare, maybe some kind of programs somehow for, I don't know how we fund it, some kind of program for early childhood. And then another thought I had too would be, compiling all the organizations that met. Our website is a really easy, might be a really easy way to, if we gave the city the information to maybe list all of those organizations with bullet points of what they do as a place where it's just a resource for all of these nonprofits, and then they can return and visit it and have contacts that are updated on those respective
The idea would be that it's a database that's filterable, so if you are, keyword, so if you're looking for, if you have a specific issue, is looking for a specific type of assistance, that it displays the 6 organizations, and then you can kind of drill down.
So there's discussion about trying to create a clearinghouse of services that include religious organizations, NGOs, and government providers in one area. And I know in a separate conversation, I think the Boys and Girls Club is now under a different management. Right, so I think that might be an area to kind of exploit as a possible area for intervention.
Can you elaborate on that? What are you thinking that there might be some?
Well, I think if we had resources for children specifically available, whether it's a social worker involved in, athletics or, I think that might be a start. Somebody there for kids to talk to, when they're at play, I think they have a much better opportunity to engage in conversation than when they're at school.
There is a program called Early Head Start that's federally funded, and it involves families, even in women's sprint, and with case management to sort of identify at-risk families with younger kids even before they qualify for Head Start. But I don't know, that may be missing. And I think there are just families that are in that cycle. But I agree, that's a key root cause that if there's any way that we could interface with those needs for really young kids or young moms who may, families maybe have to, that, needs support in order to not have a super stressed environment for these kids that then, have trauma and all of that. But looking at maybe groups of organizations that address those kind of issues.
It's also, it's how do you eat an elephant, right? So.
Oh yeah, these are huge.
Right, that's just, to take that small bite, and feel like you have potential of scoring a success, getting a win. However small, you've said from the very first days, Mark, that, if we just make progress, then, we'll have done our jobs here, right? It's a monumental task, so.
It is, but I also see things like religious organizations doing missionary work in South America and, areas where it's really broadly needed. But I don't see a lot of missionary work taking place right here locally, which is where I think that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has really done a good job in Lantern Hill providing, they've done a community garden, which brings people together and, teaches life lessons. So I think that's something that's been not very well publicized, but Pastor Shervin Evans and his wife Jennifer Jo Evans have done a really good job at pushing into. They're actually at the summit as well.
You look at Club Odyssey, it's an older demographic, but this is a similar sort of a thing where, you have a pastor, he's doing, kind of a quiet outreach.
And I think we have the religious organizations here to do that. It's just a matter of trying to organize everybody and get everybody pushing on the right side of the rock instead of pushing against each other.
So that to me seems like that's something that we can facilitate that, right? If it's a matter of trying to have the conversation, right? Not that we're not the solutions, but let's get those organizations that are at least addressing it in some way into the same room and have that conversation.
Well, I think Joel Shu, who was also there, had made mention of trying to make some coordinated efforts to get other religious organizations on board. And I think that could provide, a lot more food security because they deal with pantries much more frequently than governmental organizations do. So, I think there's some coordinated efforts that can be undertaken that would have a positive impact pretty early on, especially for kids. And that's really, my concern always, and you can ask Kerry, I was always like the guy who was looking for bad parents. you know, and not necessarily even just bad parents, but like kids of neglect have always been really something that's stirred me up. And I think that's really where we have to be focusing our efforts, because, and we're not going, the problem is you're not going to see immediate change. It's just not going to happen overnight. We're talking about a generational issue, so it's going to take a generation really for that to work. But I think that that's really where the intervention needs to take place, is with the kids and teaching them that there's, you know, a lot of people just don't think that they have a future. And how do you teach people who have parents at home that know they don't have a future and they're convinced of it? And it's really hard to break that cycle, because the sense of self-worth is damaged, you know, and then that gets passed along. So how do we teach these kids, or help the parents teach the kids, and help parents accept the fact themselves that they have the ability to make positive changes in their own lives? It's a really difficult undertaking.
So, right, and I appreciate what you said, it's depressing, but accurate. It's going to be hard to be able to make.
Well, I haven't given up yet.
So, because the point is that while we might not be able to change that situation immediately, we don't start to create change if we don't have the structure, or we don't have the kind of support in place, or the kind of thinking in place.
We have to make the general changes, the generational changes in our own thinking in order to be able to reach that goal.
Right, and then, to me, I keep thinking about how we organize the groups, the organizations, so that we can begin to kind of change our thinking, and what do we do to change that?
I think that's the discussion, right, is how do we bring everybody to the point where we can all be on the same page and recognize that we've got a mission-focused group of people that are willing to undertake something for the long run.
Right. And I think that's an actionable type of situation to at least begin trying to convene the players, and I don't think we want to take on the role of doing all that, but can we facilitate the conversation and try to get them coalesced around that particular topic? That seems to be one that we saw there's a big gap. The other thing we heard about, so I want to bring up my notes, was a rapid response team. I kept hearing that in a number of different ways. That folks felt like they really needed to, there might be something there. I don't know if that's what we want to dig into, but that was one of the things I heard folks. So,
I just have to look up an email.
okay. The other thing is we made a commitment to them, and this is on me, to make sure, and then kind of looking at you here, that we would get them all the minutes and everything else. So I want to pull that together, and I keep meaning to do that, but I'll get that together in the next week or so we can get it out to the participants.
Okay.
And I want to run it past, you, I've got all your stuff here, which is great, by the way, but I think we need to at least give all the participants not the minutes, but just what it was. But I think we would it'd be helpful for us to kind of give them a snapshot. Here's what all the notes are from the meeting. Here's the snapshot of what we see, what the conversations were. And in that way, we can kind of push the conversation a little bit into the direction that we think that it might be helpful to go. We heard there were several different things going on. We heard that there's some folks who wanted to begin to kind of work on particular issues or come together. So let's suggest that there's be some structure there, or there's some more opportunities there to have those conversations. And I think we can address the things that we can address, which is that inventory. I think we can facilitate conversations around, support for kids, or calling that generally, and begin to at least have these conversations in a little different context. Go ahead, Doctor, do you want to say something?
No, I like what you said, and I mean, maybe at some point too, how our inventory of players and services intersects with the clearinghouse that the Bassett County people are generating, because I'm sure there's got to be some synergies there. I mean, if you want, I can reach out to those people, because I should have been at that meeting. It wasn't. I would have glad to have been at that meeting, let me say that. But, because I have the name of the main person. Were they going to get back to the participants, Chris, with
We left our email addresses, so I don't know if
concept?
they're gonna,
Wasn't it somebody whose last name began with B?
I'm looking right now.
I think,
I'm really sorry.
I got all the emails and I just couldn't go, but I can begin that.
I can say I was the only law enforcement official in the room.
Really?
That's great. I will absolutely open that channel of
Yes.
communication
With the
between the
group.
city and that group, because it's probably important that we work together.
I agree, let's not duplicate efforts, and, you know, so many of these solutions, if you will, are countywide, it's not just lodged in the city. And that was really apparent when we had representatives from even other counties, and either other counties that are, you know, not Delaware County or close to us, so that was, to me, it's like, how do we think about these kind of regional solutions? The person from up in the Mohawk Valley seemed to have a lot of expertise and a lot of knowledge on these as well, so, yeah, I think that's great. If you do that, that'd be wonderful. I think that's something we can at least work with them to just figure out how we might be able to either tap into that clearinghouse or add to it or whatever it might be. But certainly we should continue to have those conversations with them as we move that, because I think that to me is, again, that was one of the things that people seem to agree on that would be really helpful for doing the work that they do. And it would be helpful just beyond the participants and the organizations, but for the real people out here that might need to know where to go. I always know as an educator, when I was encountering some challenging things, I did not know the first step on where to go to be able to support the students I needed to support, especially with mental health. And so, you know, I had to create my own relationships with different organizations and different people to be able to get my students support. It would be nice if we don't have to do that. Here we have, there's this list of organizations, here's what they do, here's the contact people, whatever it may be.
I forwarded you the email with the invite and her contact information. I'm sure you have it already anyway, but
Thank you.
I just want to make sure.
Thank you.
So were there any other, so I've got here, sorry, my notes are all over the place between what I wrote and what I have here. So organizing organizations around support for children, the inventory of organizations and capacity, certainly housing conversations are already ongoing thanks to the Housing Commission and the work that they're doing. Hopefully, I think you do have a piece of that, right, that kind of focuses on.
Yes, affordable housing.
Good, thank you. So that, at least that's being addressed over there. Were there any other takeaway issues? We have the warming shelters being...
Yeah, and I'll actually let you guys all know on the other side of my conversation, so probably late Wednesday or Thursday, I should have at least an update as to where we are.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we could do that for our reference program. I'm sure they'll reach out to us anyway, but
Yeah, no, I'll let you.
yeah, thank you.
Were there any other bits that came out of that we, I mean, to me, those are the actionable, what we can focus on as actionable, reasonable next steps, is to continue playing the organizing role, continue to play the facilitation role. Any other thoughts about that? Go ahead, Mayor.
I was wondering, you know, it is always so nice to be able to point to successes, not just for the group, but also just generally speaking, so that the public has some sort of sense of the fact that there's a forward trajectory. And I wonder as we're moving into, I know it's just September the 20th now, but, you know, in a blink, it's going to be the holiday season. And getting back to food insecurity, if there isn't something that maybe that this group might be able to generate as you know, kind of a city-generated action around that might bring some of the players together and you know, kind of facilitate maybe to a larger degree their joint success, but also to kind of put a city stamp on it a little bit, or community wellness committee stamp on it a little bit, just from that perspective. I'd like to think that maybe that might be something to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's an organizational role. I think the chief hit on it is that the churches did kind of say, yeah, we could, you know, maybe we need to have a more organizational role. I think it was in the context of homelessness that they were that brought up, but why not have a conversation with them and at least see if what role can they play And maybe it's homelessness, but maybe it's food insecurity, maybe that's something that they can play that role in. And as you suggested, many of the organizations already are playing a pretty substantial role. So maybe it's understanding a little more of that and what we need to do and again, what the gaps in that particular area are. And I'm not suggesting we have an entirely different summit, but maybe it's just trying to reach out, convene the people, have a meeting, and say, hey, we think that there could be some better organization around these particular ideas. What's the interest? What capacity do you have? How do we create the kind of organizing body that might be able to kind of live outside of this group? Because I don't think we can certainly convene all of this. But be able to try to kickstart the conversation to say, we feel like we have untapped resources here in terms of the churches working together. Perhaps they already do, I don't know, but it seems like that might be something we can at least begin to at least have a conversation about.
The churches and potentially the schools integrating into that conversation as well, I would think.
Sure. And again, maybe other organizations, there might be some other organizations that we're not even Boys and Girls Club, that was a good point there too. So that we might be able to kind of get into the same room to have that.
Well, I think where we're going to have, a critical issue is going to be in capacity. Because when you talk about providers, I know that, there's a shortage of social workers for the county. I think the county's like 14 slots shy of their target. They just lost another very valuable employee to the Capital District. And again, it just comes back to salaries, I think, in a lot of ways. When you have Shenango County that's providing salaries at $20,000 more a year than what Otsego County is, where are they going to go? It's not that far of a commute, especially if they're allowed to live outside of the county. So, I just don't know. I think the salary survey may come up with something, but again, that's not at the county level, that's at the city level. So it's looking at city job titles, right? Maybe that's something the county should look into also. I just don't know. But again, that's out of my pay grade. It's just a matter of, what do I see? And I see good people that are talented providers that are going elsewhere because it's a better living for them. And, it's hard to support a family on what's available.
Right.
There's a lot of competition for very few.
There is. If Bassett has issues getting physicians, and I think you mentioned dentists at one point. I think these are things that are pretty well regarded. It just happen to be lawyers. Attorneys we're at a huge deficit for attorneys right now. So there's a lot of balls in the air.
Yeah.
Big problems.
Yeah, well, I think, what we're seeing is that we're getting a critical mass on the exodus of people from New York State in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's critical mass. Exactly where we are.
I think as we keep talking about these things, though, we recognize, however, you just connected salaries and jobs, and we needed more of infusion in people, and they're all connected, right? All these particular issues. So, right, if we bring 1,000 people in, good paying jobs, and we can solve some of those issues, but how do we do that, right? So it's like there's all these connections, and they're trying to solve one thing, might help you get some movement over here, but what's the right thing to pull on in order to be able to get it, and then how do you pull on it in a way that creates the positive impetus forward?
You just described my 3 a.m.
All of you sleep. All right, so I guess next steps. Emily, I'll work on the notes and get that out to you, then maybe we can watch that. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, since you have the notes, if you want to take them up, that would be good to circulate to everybody.
Yeah.
And if you wanted, I can create like an online spreadsheet that we can share and start compiling database information.
Are you able to download the list of everybody into an Excel sheet that you got, or is it mostly just?
I think the invite list is in Excel, or I can definitely get that data of like who we invited. That's where I would start.
Right.
But then kind of putting in, probably with those notes, what would help is like then to have keywords for each, like if it was going to become a searchable kind of thing.
Do you want to take your cover sheet with all the organizations that have introduced themselves and put those notes on?
If you want, I don't know if you want to I could just take it if you want me to type it up.
I was just suggesting the cover sheet
Sure.
with the organization,
Yeah.
everything else to kind of work it out.
Yeah, that would be great.
So, right, so we can work on that then, and we can certainly give Luke a lot of assignments because he's not here. Then, the organizing, the two organizing conversations, church groups and then the other organizations around children, thoughts about how we might begin to kind of execute that and create, obviously we need to identify the groups that are involved, and then try to call a meeting and signal in advance what we were interested in doing so that we, hopefully they'd come with the right thoughts. Is there, am I missing anything? Well, I suppose we kind of begin to organize them.
I'm just wondering, has everybody here been to the County Enforcement Girls Club? Are you familiar with the facility?
Yes.
Someone, I've been there a long time, since my kids were young.
I know, I used to hang out.
It's actually an underused facility, it's a
Really?
huge facility. Okay.
I think Frank Russo from the YMCA, whoever's under management but those are all people that need to be brought into the conversation because they're at least seeing more from that perspective than we would be because that's their direct involvement, that's their charge.
Then we have organizations in some parts of the city, not unfortunately all parts of the city, just 6 Wood Booster Clubs brings to mind as a group that is fairly well connected to their neighborhoods. It'd be great to see more of those types of organizations. So they know the players.
Also, like,
Right.
moves and stuff too, right?
Well, and the chief Yuri hits on, I think the schools become central to this conversation.
Yes.
And then the superintendent was very eager to understand. I think he was one of the ones that felt that having the inventory of organizations would be very helpful to them, so, All right, so can I suggest maybe we focus on let's get the minutes and then the kind of, the structure at least for the different organizations, and we can see what the Bassett Clearinghouse information, what they come back with. Wrap that up and then kind of turn our attention to these other organization ideas with maybe the idea of trying to organize something, at least a meeting. It does not need to be a summit. I don't think it should be a summit. I think it's a lot easier to be able to pull together, have, 10 organizations represented in that same room and let them know what it is and plan at some point. I think we could probably do that here in our basement conference room or someplace else, so, and then and be able to then pull that together. Does that make sense timeline-wise? This is still daunting. It's just, you said you've been working on your entire year, but these are daunting tasks, but I feel like at least we can.
And, it's been interesting because you start looking at it from an enforcement perspective early on, and then you start to recognize that the value is not necessarily in enforcement, but in prevention, and, it's how do you get there? We see with the drug courts and domestic violence, the integrated domestic violence courts, and, I think there's been some real positive impacts there, but the success stories are, you hang your hat on the ones that you get, and there's still a lot of the ones that you miss.
Right. Yeah. But they're not about teaching career.
Well, I'll never forget one incident where I was talking with a heroin addict in her home who weighed 75 pounds maybe, and I thought she was going to die. And there was an arrest down in the Binghamton area, and I was able to talk to Judge Burns, and they managed to reel her and get her incarcerated and sober, and now she's got kids, and so those are the success stories that I look at and go like, I never would have thought.
Right.
And those are they're infrequent, but those are the ones that I kind of try to, that's my carrot and stick.
Right.
Just one more.
Yeah. So she said it may be that we end up with a small project, but maybe just a small, well-defined project will have a big impact.
Yes. I had one of my dad's friends tell me once that the strongest walls are made from the smallest stones.
just now, Chief, is a motivator. It's not the first time you told that story, I'm sure, because it has that impact of giving you hope, giving everyone hope. Yeah, we can, even as we make just one small difference, one life, how important is that? It's pretty darn important, so.
All right, so I guess, October meeting on each end? Sorry. Put you on the spot there.
Oh, I just saw it.
Yeah, things around.
Bonnie just saw the shirt.
Yeah. It's what?
On Monday the 3rd.
Oh, wow, so that's pretty good. Way around the corner. So let's make that, this is more than me, I'm talking to me here. I have a goal to have those notes done, and then I'll get to you, we can kind of go from there. I just really feel responsible to want to get these out to folks, but I want that to pass everybody first to kind of weigh in and make sure that they can capture everything as we roll on notes, and then kind of a snapshot of what the takeaways were and where we're going to go and what we're going to do. I think it might be nice to also kind of put on record, here's what we're going to do, kind of we're stepping up and we're going to be accountable to this, and what are other groups interested in doing, if people want to kind of step forward, what are those particular groups that might coalesce around some of these particular topics. We'll put that together so we can kind of have that hopefully launched or ready to launch by that October 3rd meeting, and then we can focus on October 3rd on the next group, the next pieces. I want to return to kind of getting someone here, and I appreciate, you did a lot of work to kind of identify some folks that might be good, and I think it might be good to hear from somebody in the community that, around kind of the issues around children. So I don't know if anybody has any ideas of someone that they might know that would be really informative. Let me know so I can reach out to that person and ask them if they wouldn't mind. I just found that to be really helpful to listen to some of the folks that are out there in the field, listen to the chiefs about what their day-to-day knowledge is. And I think that's really important. It helps inform me and it helps inform where we're going. So, does that sound like a plan for October 3rd as well? That's okay, whatever.
That's good, that's good.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.